Ella Fitzgerald was 16 years old and sleeping in a Harlem train station when she decided to enter the Apollo Theater amateur night. It was late 1934 and she'd been living on the streets for months, ever since her mother died and her stepfather told her to leave. She was cold, hungry, and running out of options, but she could dance. An Apollo amateur night paid $25 to the winner. $25 was more money than Ella had seen in months. It was food. It was a room for a week. It was survival. She had no idea that walking through those Apollo theater doors would change not just her life, but the entire trajectory of American music. This is the story of how a homeless teenager became a legend in one night, of the moment her feet froze on stage and she had to make an impossible choice, of the voice that emerged when everything else failed, and of how the harshest audience in America fell silent, then erupted, recognizing something they'd never heard before. Ella's mother, Tempie Fitzgerald, had died of a heart attack in the summer of 1932. Ella had been 15 years old. The loss had shattered everything, not just emotionally, but practically. Tempie had been the anchor, the provider, the one who kept their small Harlem apartment functioning. After Tempie died, Ella moved in with her aunt, but that arrangement quickly fell apart. There were too many people, too little money, too much tension. By early 1933, Ella was essentially on her own. Her stepfather wanted nothing to do with her. Extended family had their own struggles during the Depression. So Ella did what thousands of young people were doing in Harlem during those years. She survived however she could. She slept in hallways when it was cold, curling up in corners where building superintendents might not notice until morning. Train stations were warmer but riskier. Police sometimes swept through, moving homeless people along. She learned which subway platforms were safest, which corners had the most foot traffic for street performing, which restaurants might give away day-old bread at closing time. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, though that was real enough. Cold November nights, hunger that made her dizzy, exhaustion that went bone deep. The worst part was the invisibility. People walked past her on the street like she didn't exist. She was 16 years old and utterly alone in a city of millions. She danced on street corners for coins, the Lindy Hop, the Charleston, whatever the crowd wanted to see, on good days when she had energy and the weather cooperated and people were feeling generous. She might make 50 cents, enough for a meal, maybe two. On bad days, nothing. Those were the days she went to bed, wherever bed happened to be, with her stomach empty and her future feeling impossible. But Ella had one advantage: music surrounded her. Even broke and homeless, she could hear the best musicians in the world for free by standing outside Harlem's clubs. She'd press her ear to the walls of the Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, Small's Paradise, listening to Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson. The music poured out into the street, and Ella absorbed it like a lifeline. Harlem in 1934 was vibrant and desperate simultaneously. The Renaissance was fading, but the music scene was thriving. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Billie Holiday, they were all performing in the neighborhood's clubs and theaters. Music was everywhere, and for Ella it became both escape and hope. She'd always loved singing. Her mother had noticed it, had encouraged it, but Ella was shy, deeply self-conscious about her appearance. She was awkward, gangly, with clothes that didn't fit right and a face she thought was plain. Dancing felt safer. You could hide in movement, in rhythm, in the crowd's energy. But singing was different. Singing meant standing still, being seen, being judged. One cold November evening in 1934, Ella was with some friends near the Apollo Theater on 125th Street. They were talking about Amateur Night, the weekly competition where anyone could perform for prize money and the slim chance of being discovered. "You should enter," one friend said to Ella. "You can dance better than half the people who win." $25, another friend added. "That's real money, Ella. $25. Ella thought about what that could mean. A week in a rooming house, food every day, maybe even new shoes. "When's the next one?" she asked. "Tomorrow night, Wednesday. You just show up and put your name in." Ella made the decision right there. She would enter Apollo Amateur Night. She would dance. She would win that $25. November 21, 1934. Ella woke up in a hallway where she'd spent the night, her back aching from sleeping on hard floor. She had one decent dress, not nice, but clean enough. She'd been saving it for something important. This qualified. She spent the day preparing mentally, practicing dance moves in her head, trying not to be nervous, trying not to think about what failure would mean, not just losing the prize money, but the humiliation of failing publicly at the one thing she thought she could do. That evening she walked to the Apollo Theater. The line was already forming, dozens of young performers all hoping for their shot. Singers, dancers, comedians, musicians. Everyone desperate, everyone talented, everyone gambling that tonight might change everything. The Apollo Theater Amateur Night was legendary for being brutal. The audience didn't tolerate mediocrity. If you weren't good, they let you know loudly. Booing, jeering, throwing things. The executioner would literally sweep you off stage with a broom if the crowd turned against you. But if you were good, if you connected with that crowd, the same audience that destroyed weak performers would lift exceptional ones to instant fame. Winning Apollo Amateur Night could launch a career. Ella signed up, put her name on the list. Ella Fitzgerald, dancer. She waited backstage with the other performers. Everyone was nervous, but some hit it better than others. Singers doing vocal warm-ups, dancers stretching, everyone stealing glances at the competition. Through the curtain, Ella could hear the crowd, hundreds of people packed into the theater, loud and energetic. The Apollo audience was mostly black, mostly working class, and they knew music. You couldn't fool them. You couldn't fake it. They'd heard the best, and they expected excellence. The show began. The first performer went out, a singer who was competent but unmemorable. The crowd was polite but not enthusiastic. The second performer, a dancer, got stronger applause. The third, a comedian, killed. The audience loved him. Ella's stomach was in knots. She watched through the curtain, seeing how the crowd responded, feeling the energy of the room. This was real. This was happening. Ella Fitzgerald, the stage manager, called, "You're next." She walked to the wings, heart pounding so hard she could hear it. The MC, Ralph Cooper, was introducing her. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is a young lady from right here in Harlem. She's going to dance for you tonight. Let's give a warm Apollo welcome to Miss Ella Fitzgerald." Applause, not huge but encouraging. Ella stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her immediately, bright, hot, blinding after the darkness of the wings. She couldn't see the audience clearly, just shapes and shadows and the sense of hundreds of people watching. She was supposed to start dancing. The band was ready. The audience was waiting. But Ella's feet wouldn't move, literally froze. Her legs felt like concrete. The fear that she'd been pushing down all day suddenly overwhelmed her. All those people, all those eyes, judging her, seeing her shabby dress, her awkward body, her desperation. She stood there, paralyzed. The audience started to murmur, restless, confused. What was happening? Ralph Cooper walked over, microphone in hand. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked quietly. Ella shook her head slightly. I can't. You can't dance," Ralph asked, keeping his voice low but the microphone picking up everything. "My feet, they won't move." The audience heard that, some laughter, not mean yet but getting there. The Apollo crowd had no patience. Performers who wasted their time. Ralph made a decision. "Can you do anything else? Sing, maybe?" Ella looked at him, terrified. Singing was scarier than dancing. Singing meant being fully exposed, fully vulnerable. But dancing was impossible right now. Her feet still wouldn't move, and she desperately needed that $25. "I can sing," she whispered. "Then sing," Ralph said, stepping back. Ella stood at the microphone. The band looked at her, waiting for a cue. She had to pick a song, fast, something she knew well enough to sing without thinking. "The Object of My Affection," she said to the band leader, a popular song. The Boswell sisters had made it famous. The band knew it. They started playing. The introduction filled the theater, and Ella opened her mouth and sang. The sound that came out shocked everyone, not because it was bad, because it was extraordinary. Her voice was pure, clear, with a quality that cut through the theater like light through darkness. Not powerful in volume, Ella was nervous, holding back, but pure in tone, every note perfectly placed, every word clear. The audience, which had been murmuring and restless seconds ago, went completely silent. Ella kept singing. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the audience, the lights, the fear. Just focused on the song, on the melody, on making each note as perfect as she could. Her voice started to gain confidence. She wasn't just singing the song, she was finding feeling in it, emotion, interpretation. The shyness that had paralyzed her feet was somehow transmuting into vulnerability in her voice, making the performance more moving, more real. In the audience, people were leaning forward. Some had tears in their eyes. This wasn't just another amateur night performance. This was something different, something special. Near the back of the theater sat Bardu Ali, the manager for Chick Webb's orchestra. Chick Webb was one of the most successful band leaders in Harlem, and Bardu was always looking for new talent. He'd come to amateur night on a whim, expecting nothing exceptional. He was hearing something he'd never heard before. A voice with that kind of purity was rare. but more than technique, there was something emotionally direct about this awkward teenager singing with her eyes closed. She meant every word. Ella reached the final verse. Her voice, which had started uncertain, now filled the theater. The band played the last notes. Silence. Then the audience exploded. Applause, cheering, people standing. The notoriously harsh Apollo crowd was giving a standing ovation to a homeless teenager who 30 seconds earlier couldn't even move her feet. Ella opened her eyes, shocked. People were on their feet, cheering for her, actually cheering. Ralph Cooper came back out, grinning. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we might have found something special here. Miss Ella Fitzgerald." More applause. Ella walked off stage in a daze, barely processing what had just happened. The rest of Amateur Night continued. Other performers, some very good, but the audience kept talking about the girl who couldn't dance but could sing like that. At the end of the night, Ralph Cooper announced the winners. Third place, second place, then, and your first place winner taking home $25 and a week's engagement right here at the Apollo Theater. Miss Ella Fitzgerald. Ella walked back on stage and someone handed her an envelope. $25. She clutched it like it was gold, because it was survival, it was hope. But she'd also won something else, a week's worth of performances at the Apollo, a chance to be seen, to be heard, to prove this wasn't a fluke. After the show, Bardu Ali found her backstage. "You were remarkable," he told her. "How old are you?" 17, Ella lied, adding a year. "You have training?" "No, sir, I just sing." Bardu studied her. "I manage Chick Webb's orchestra. You know who that is?" Ella's eyes widened. Everyone in Harlem knew Chick Webb. "Yes, sir. He's looking for a female singer. I'm going to bring him to see you this week. If he likes what he hears, you might have a real job." Ella couldn't speak, just nodded. True to his word, Bardu brought Chick Webb to the Apollo later that week. Chick was a small man, a hunchback from childhood tuberculosis, but his musical authority was enormous. He sat in the audience while Ella performed, listening with a critical ear. After the show, Chick found Ella. "You've got something," he said. "Raw but real. You want to sing with my orchestra?" "Yes," Ella said immediately. "Yes, sir. It's not easy work. Rehearsals, performances, touring. You have to be professional. Can you do that?" "I can," Ella promised. "All right, we'll try it. Rehearsal Monday at the Savoy Ballroom. Don't be late." Ella Fitzgerald, who'd been sleeping in train stations weeks earlier, was now the featured vocalist for one of Harlem's premier orchestras. The transition wasn't seamless. Chick's band members were skeptical of this awkward teenager. She didn't look like a star. She didn't act confident. Some wondered if Chick had made a mistake, but when Ella sang, doubts evaporated. That voice, pure, flexible, emotionally direct, was undeniable. Within months, she was recording with the orchestra. Within a year, she was becoming famous. The homeless girl from Harlem streets was becoming Ella Fitzgerald. Years later, after she'd won Grammys and sold millions of records and performed for presidents, people would ask Ella about that night at the Apollo. "I was going to dance," she'd say. "That was the plan, but my feet froze. I couldn't move, so I had to sing instead." "Were you scared?" they'd ask. "Terrified, more scared than I've ever been, but also desperate. I needed that $25, and I needed something to change. I couldn't keep living on the streets." What she rarely talked about was how that moment of forced choice, when dancing became impossible and singing became necessary, had revealed something she didn't know about herself. She'd thought dancing was safer because it hid her, but actually, singing was her truth. The vulnerability she'd been afraid of was exactly what made her voice powerful. When she stopped trying to hide and just sang, that's when people heard something real. That Apollo Amateur Night, November 21, 1934, launched one of the most extraordinary careers in music history. The girl who walked in homeless, hungry, and desperate walked out with $25, a week's engagement, and the attention of people who could change her life, but more fundamentally, she walked out having discovered that the thing she was most afraid of, being fully seen, fully vulnerable, fully herself, was actually her greatest strength. Ella Fitzgerald performed at the Apollo Theater dozens of times over the following decades. Always she'd remember that first night, the fear, the frozen feet, the choice to sing instead of dance, the moment everything changed. "The Apollo made me," she'd say in interviews. "Not just because I won Amateur Night, but because they made me face my fear. When my feet froze and I couldn't dance, I had to do the thing that scared me most. I had to stand still and let them hear my voice, and it turned out that was what I was supposed to do all along. From homeless to history, from frozen feet to Grammy Awards, from too scared to dance to too Essential to ignore, one night, one choice, one voice that changed everything.